You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christie Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. Welcome to the first solo show of my new series this month on marriage, intimacy, and mental health. On Wednesday, I aired an interview with Dr. Morgan Anderson. She's a clinical psychologist, attachment theory expert, author, and host of the top-rated podcast, Let's Get Vulnerable. If you missed the episode, definitely go back and check it out. Dr. Morgan shares the story of her childhood, the loss of her mom, and how that loss impacted her immediate family and ultimately her career and her relationships. It is a powerful story of resilience, personal growth, and healing that I really want you to hear. And before I move onto the core of Dr. Morgan's work and my reflections on attachment theory, I just want to reiterate Dr. Morgan's bottom line and why she shares her story. She says, and I quote, "If I can heal, anyone can." And not that this is a competition of trauma or anything, but she goes on to say that it's never too late. She says, you're never too broken. You can do the work and heal. Now, coming from me, and I know she would agree, be warned, you will need help, and that is a good thing. If you relate to Dr. Morgan's story or if you are struggling with relationships, her programs are available to you. Therapists are available to you, coaches, mentors, whoever, except what took me a long time to learn. Help is only going to make you stronger and get you where you want to be faster. And honestly, better off, All right, so now this attachment theory stuff. I shared on the show with Dr. Morgan that I took her quiz online to find out my attachment style. I linked this in the show notes for you. And my results are 60% secure and 40% anxious. I also shared with her on that show that I found it to be a bit difficult when taking the quiz to decipher between how I felt in previous relationships and in previous points of personal growth in my life versus now in my marriage and after years of therapy. But interestingly enough, before writing and recording this episode, I took the quiz again and strictly had my marriage in mind and my most recent self and my beliefs in mind. And guess what? My results were the exact same. So for me, at least, this is a pretty accurate depiction of my attachment style. I think that it has pretty much figured me out. So straight from Dr. Morgan's website, secure attachment style means you are able to develop intimacy in your romantic relationships quite easily. You feel able to depend on others, and you also have the ability to self-soothe. You tend to have clear boundaries and the ability to communicate what you need. You value your relationships, and yet you also foster your own sense of independence and confidence. So yeah, I agree with this for myself, even at my most vulnerable moments within a relationship. Overall, I do believe it to be true that I am able to develop intimacy quite easily, that I can depend on people and communicate boundaries and needs. It's not always been smooth sailing. It's not always been pretty. It's not always been comfortable. And sometimes I've not been able to do that. But overall, when I look at the course of my life, whether it's romantic relationships, friendships, whatever it is, I agree with the previously stated statement about secure attachment. But let's go on to anxious. So again, straight from Dr. Morgan's website, anxious attachment style means when you are in a relationship, you find that you are frequently worried about your partner leaving you. You often struggle to communicate your needs, express your emotions, and set boundaries. You may feel at times that you are quote unquote too much or quote unquote needy. Having a relationship is very important to you, and you frequently feel down on yourself that you quote can't figure it out, end quote. You worry you may end up alone. So when I read this and I think about it being 100% my attachment style, it's really off. But when I really look at my results and see the 60% to this now 40% anxious style, yeah, I can see it. Looking at the areas of my marriage that I can relate to this attachment style, it mainly comes into focus when I think about my mental health. So I believe it is in the upcoming episode with Dr. Lex that I talk about how I often feel like I'm a burden our relationship has to overcome. I get anxious, I get depressed, I get overwhelmed, and while I am so grateful and appreciative that my husband supports me through those times, I sometimes feel like I weigh us down. I feel like this hurdle we have to overcome, and while I've said it before, and I do wholeheartedly believe that everyone experiences the feeling of anxiety and the feeling of depression, my husband does not express these feelings in the same ways I do. I often don't even know he's experiencing emotion, which is indicative of how men are socialized, and while that is a whole other topic, it is relevant here. My attachment style is partially based on how I was socialized to express emotion versus how my partner was socialized to express emotion. I feel like a burden because I express all these emotions and feelings all the time that we have to deal with. Meanwhile, he shows nothing. Now, I've done enough work in therapy to know that it's not actually that simple. It is on me to work on how I feel like a burden, regardless of him showing emotion or not. They are related, but it's not actually a cause and effect. It's not like he doesn't show emotion, therefore I'm a burden, which is sometimes, unfortunately, how it feels for me. So let me rephrase this right now. I feel like a burden for struggling with my mental health and needing his support. It's not his fault. But this feeling is amplified by his lack of showing need for mental health support because I don't feel like the support goes both ways. Like I don't feel like it's an equal playing field. And, all that being said, I can and will continue to work on my feelings of burden. My logical brain knows that I support him in ways that he might not feel like he's able to support me in the same way back. And my logical brain also believes that in the long run, I am glad to be able to fully express my emotions within my relationship. Anxious, depressed, and all. I think ultimately for me, it is healthier, and I feel very safe doing so. Now, going back to the definition of the anxious attachment style, where it says having a relationship is very important to you, and you frequently feel down on yourself that you can't figure it out. I don't relate to this anymore, but it is spot on for my younger years. I always wanted a relationship, and while I was in them, I rarely felt secure as a teen and in my early 20s before meeting my husband. I always wanted to, be the one to say, hey, let's have a talk. I always wanted reassurances and commitment that I rarely got. Boyfriends were a series of get together, then break up, get together and break up, flings or situationships as the kids call them these days. And I only had a few times in my life where I felt like I was in the driver's seat of those relationships. And as I'm saying that out loud right now, I can totally see how over many years of those patterns, how that would evolve into an anxious attachment style. If you're not ever getting the security, yeah, of course you're going to worry about it moving forward. So I don't know. This is definitely, I'm glazing over it because it is really in depth and it is really personal, truly. This month is going to be tough for me in that aspect. This is an area of life, intimacy and marriage and relationships that, as much as I have shared, it is difficult to share the most. So hang in there with me. I hope at the very least you are now anxious about your attachment style. To reiterate, Dr. Morgan, there are 4 attachment styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. Again, I've linked Dr. Morgan's quiz in the show notes, so please take it if you don't already know your style. And just a reminder, it's not a label that has to stick with you forever or define who you are. It is merely a way of looking at how you relate in relationships, how you develop relationships, cultivate them, everything. How you are in a relationship. So for more on that, check out Dr. Morgan on social media and listen to her podcast, all linked in the show notes. And also, if you want to hear more from Dr. Morgan, go to sasssays.com/panel and sign up to join us live on our virtual Zoom panel. Bring your questions, ask your questions ahead of time, whatever you're comfortable with. June 28th, 1 p.m. Eastern. Sign up for the Zoom link, sasssays.com/panel, and check back in on Wednesday for my next expert interview with Dr. Tara. All right, bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.